We hadn't seen where the government or another media outlet had taken a population of veterans, of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, and had gone through them kind of systematically and found out how they died. How many were dying of natural causes? How many were dying of suicide? How many were dying of things that we have no idea that they're dying of?
The original request we made was to get dates of death of all Iraq and Afghanistan veterans who had returned home and then been reported deceased to the Department of Veterans Affairs. And Jeremy asked for that, and what they sent us back was a list of birth dates and enlistment locations of all the veterans who had passed away since returning home.
So we had this big list, and our question was, what do we do with it? What can we do with it? Because it didn't have cause of death, which is really what we were trying to get at. So another member of the team, Eric Dexheimer, kind of had this idea, which at first seemed impossible, to use the information that we did have to identify all the veterans on the list, and from there go out and use available public records to get cause of death for them. And so that's what we did.
We had to wait a considerable amount of time just to get that database, and then it took us months from that point to turn that very minimal information into names of people. We spent a lot of time on Ancestry.com, which was a really good resource. We went to various county medical examiners, so we got a lot of autopsy reports. We called justices of the peace in little counties all over Texas, went through a lot of newspaper obituaries. I think we had started with 360-something names, and we got the actual cause of death for close to 275.
Mainly what we wanted to do was to take the results, the kinds of ways that people died, their causes of death, and compare them with the Texas population, or as many other populations as we could, to see if this was unusual or what was different about it. And in order to do that, we had to capture it in the same way, to find out as much information as we could and capture it in a very consistent manner.
With the database, we were able to see how specific subgroups were dying, and so we found out that of the guys with PTSD, almost all of them died either from suicide, overdose, or a motor vehicle crash. Hardly any of them died just from natural causes.
We kept seeing so many single vehicle crashes, and that's usually a result of driver error or reckless driving. And when we pulled the law enforcement reports on those things, many times the officer would say high rate of speed, or 100 miles an hour, or flew off of an overpass. And that was indicative to us that something special was going on that was putting them at more risk than just your average 26-year-old guy.
We anticipated that we would see a lot of suicides. We'd all read about the media stories prior to our reporting that showed that active duty soldiers were killing themselves at an alarming rate. What we were surprised by was the number of soldiers who had returned with substance abuse problems, and what became more and more apparent was a lot of those substance abuse problems had begun while they were in active duty service, that the prescription drugs, in particular the opiates, had been prescribed to them in large quantities and very readily, and that those were addictions that had carried past their time of deployment and on to their retirement. And when combined with PTSD in particular, these drug problems often ended up in drug overdoses. I think about a third of our deaths ended up being drug overdoses, which was stunning.
The data was part of it, but it was really the reporting that made a difference. I mean, the data told us where to look and to find the people, but it's not about the numbers. It's about the people who were in the stories, about the people who were affected, the people that we talked to and the families that we talked to realize that there's an issue here.
We were also very fortunate and very lucky to find people who were very much willing to talk and very much willing to share their stories. And I think as a reporter, we were very thankful for that, because it really did help us illustrate, both in words and photographs and videos, the severity of the issues facing our veterans.
Their kids had come home, but they had come home, every one of them said he was a changed man. He wasn't the same boy that left. And so talking with those, especially those moms, that was very touching.
One of the big holes that I think that this exposed was the fact that nobody is tracking these guys. And since the story came out, the VA has told us that they are embarking on what they call an all-cause mortality study. There's some limitations to it, but it will basically look at the population of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans that they have knowledge of and get causes of death. If the same kind of numbers and percentages are happening, then it would seem that the oversight of the prescription drug situation needs a lot more attention than it's getting right now.